What's up, friends? This is Jesse Leach from Killswitch Engage, and you're listening to Heavy Consequence. I feel like you can't talk about punk rock unless you put in the Dead Boys. They just had this energy to them. You can see clips on the internet, but the sound, it comes through the speakers. You can sort of feel the attitude and the sarcasm. And that's the one thing I've always loved about punk rock was there's a tongue firmly planted in the cheek of this sound that, especially as a teenager, I think punk is a great gateway into like subcultures, into counterculture, because it's got attitude to it. This sort of like, it's a mixture of nihilism and then compassion. I think the nihilist end of it really appeals to a teenager when you're just kind of pissed off and you don't like the status quo in society, you don't feel like you fit in. And punk rock is sort of like this warm embrace of not giving a shit that I think really drew me in. And when I first heard the Dead Boys, there's a snottiness, like the album title says, that really draws you in. And just great songwriting, and there's a feeling to it, just this unexplainable feeling like you're accepted. If you're an outcast, you're welcome here. And that's kind of what the Dead Boys did for me at a young age. Yeah, this is a great Irish band that really had a political influence. As a matter of fact, you can hear Rage Against the Machine, like Tom Morello straight up ripped off some of the riffs from this band. And, in their lyrics too, there's a real intelligence there. There's a real sort of urgency for people to wake up and realize you don't have to think the way society is pushing you in. They're one of those bands, very much like The Clash, where there's a political message there, and they're asking you to sort of think differently than society would have you think. And it's just great songs, great guitar tone, great vocals, and great lyrics. They're really a perfect package. And representing Ireland in the punk rock scene, it was a very important time, especially when you look at the division between Northern Ireland and even just within Northern Ireland and Belfast. And these guys really spoke to that time frame, and to me was just, there was an intelligence there. In contrast to the sort of nihilistic snootiness, you had bands like Stiff Little Fingers that cared a lot and really wanted to make a difference and impact in their culture and community. Yeah, GBH are the quintessential punk band for me. If someone who had never ever heard punk rock and wanted to know what punk rock sounded like, I would put on this record. Sonically, it just sounds like, it's lo-fi. It just sounds like a bunch of guys threw together some instruments. The drums kind of sound like you're kicking a cardboard box. Like, it's just got this attitude to it, this imperfection to it, but also a power to it. And GBH are one of those bands that stands the test of time. They're still putting out good punk rock. They're still one of my favorite punk bands. And I'd say if I were to pick top 5 punk bands of all time, GBH is in that for sure. Just a killer band. And that record to me is just unbridled ferocity. It's punk rock at its finest. Joe and his lyrics and everything that he stood for as a human being, from what I have heard from friends of friends, it's just such an influence to me. Someone who's able to write lyrics in such a way where it just made you think as a kid. I've got Joe Strummer tattooed on my forearm here, and Joe Strummer behind my head. And to me, combat rock, I don't know, you get the popular stuff, you have the stuff that like might have swayed you into the Clash, but to me that record, Combat Rock, is like the best of the best. A moment in that band's career that there was still like this lightning in the bottle feeling. And I love that record from start to finish. I love the Clash. I'm a huge fan of them. Discharge is a band that you can't talk about punk rock, but I'm gonna even go out there and say you can't even talk about metal without talking about Discharge. Lemmy from Motorhead cites Discharge as an influence. They changed the sound of Motorhead. And to me, Motorhead is one of the best bands to ever come out of anything. They're one of the most incredible bands ever. So if you can draw a line from Discharge to Motorhead, you're talking, the influence is huge. And Discharge is still still, I mean, he's a new singer, but he's been around for years. That band is still making great music. But you want to talk about lyrics that'll make you think, lyrics that'll inspire you, and then their sound, the D-beat sound. There's a whole subgenre named after them, the D-beat subgenre. They have a sound. It's that really interesting because to me it's very rock and roll. It's punk, but the rhythm section is rock and roll. It just gets you wanting to move. It's something about it. And then just the buzzsaw grinding guitars, and even the way he places his voice. If you really pay attention to punk music, a lot of punk singers are rapid fire. Their voices everywhere. Discharge takes pauses. It's interesting where he doesn't sing, so where he chooses not to put his voice and the music sort of takes over. They have a really interesting push and pull to their sound that I love. It makes them very unique, and you know, a band that really helped redefine to me what punk and hardcore and even again metal would become because of Discharge. Cockspur are like anthematic, fun pub rock. When I first heard them, there was a smile on my face, a beer in my hand, a smile on my face, and you know, they're very much connected to initially the sort of the glam scene that was going on in England, and then sort of got into the boot boys and the, you know, the skinhead culture. And when I say the word skinhead, I mean the actual skinheads, the non-racist, reggae-loving oi scene. But to me, they were greater than that too. They may have been embraced by subcultures and genres, but to me, they're punk rock for the people. It feels like pub rock, you know. When you hear them, you sort of just want to be elbow to elbow with them, having a conversation about how you hate your boss, or how like getting old sucks. And they kind of touch on all the common stuff. It feels very blue collar, but they're able to write a song about something as simple as like, you know, getting old and looking back on being young and how foolish we all were, and making you sing along to it. It takes, to me, and this might be a stretch for some people, but it takes like almost like a David Bowie kind of sing along, glammy. Even their guitar tone is a little lighter, and the distortion's turned down just a bit, but equally sort of, you know, I guess violent punk rock as well, because you mix the two together. If you've ever seen them live, which I had the pleasure of seeing them in Brooklyn, and it was nonstop pogoing and like pitting, but like friendly sort of 70s punk rock pitting. And it was the entire venue from the front of the stage to the back of the stage. People were just two-stepping and pogoing the entire set, arm in arm, beer everywhere, people singing along. One of the most fun shows I've ever been to in my entire life. And, you know, just put on anything by them, even put on their new shit right now, and you'll be humming along within a couple songs. Just a great anthematic punk rock band. Exploited came to me at a very young age. They're one of the first few punk bands I heard. It was a compilation cassette tape that I had from a friend, you know, dubbed over, called Punk and Disorderly. And it had like, you know, like 30 songs from punk bands. And it even stretched back to like, you know, Iggy and the Stooges. Like there was all kinds of stuff that proto-punk. But when I heard the Exploited, and it was like, I Believe in Anarchy, and then it was Exploited Barmy Army. It was very sort of like, just very simple, you know, raw punk rock. And then I heard this record, and to me, it's kind of when they switched their style a little bit. They got a little heavier. They got a little metallic even. The guitar tone changed, the lyrics changed, and to me, it's kind of when they became a little more political, as the album title suggests. It's a protest against, you know, the Queen and the what's the word? The monarchy. And that sort of opened the gates to, they were the first band that sort of had something political to say. But again, very nihilistic and sort of like middle finger up the whole time. And a band that, again, is still going to this day. A band I still love. So yeah, that's a great record. Good gateway drug for somebody who's getting into punk as a young kid. Yeah, Dead Kennedys to me aren't just a punk band. They're so much more than that. And even just in their tone, their guitar tone, they brought in that surf rock sound. It was different from anything I'd heard. And then you hear Jello Biafra's voice. There's nobody sound, you automatically know it's him. And then you want to talk about sarcasm, you want to talk about being facetious, having your tongue firmly planted in your mouth so far that the tongue is sticking through the skin. Like, it is the most brilliant, sort of passive aggressive, angry music you'll ever hear, and funny. The way he makes fun of culture is just so enticing. And then to boot, if you watch footage, I had a VHS tape of a performance that they did, and he's wearing these green surgical gloves, and his stage antics, he looks like someone who's got schizophrenia, just an absolute madman and a showman. I think at one point the Dead Kennedys might have been one of the most important bands in the world. And intelligence, the intelligence behind the music and the lyrics. People always cite a band like Bad Religion, which I love Bad Religion too, but to me, without the Dead Kennedys, the hyper intelligent sort of critique on society would never be there without the Dead Kennedys. Super important band. And there was a point in the 80s where, to me, they were probably one of the most important bands out there doing what they're doing, and a band that you gotta look up and watch those performances from the 80s. Jello is just, he's something else. He's an alien. So Operation Ivy, I know every single song by heart. As many people know, it's the precursor to Rancid. Lint, or Tim Armstrong, was the guitar player in that band. To me, there's so much I could say about this band. I think sonically, they just blended two styles of music that I think in the early days of ska, you would never really think punk. I think these days most people assume that because the third wave of ska became so big, but ska music was, rooted to rocksteady and Jamaican music. There was no punk rock in it at all. So to take that style and put punk into it and speed it up and give it this attitude is absolutely genius, because it adds this already existing feeling and energy that ska music has and that punk has, and creating what they call skunk, I guess is what some people call them. But what gets me about them is their messages. As a 15-year-old kid filled with a car full of people smoking weed, driving down the highway, going to a house party or going to the beach or just anything, it was the soundtrack to my youth. And it felt like these guys, and they were long broken up at that point when I was listening to them, but it just felt like I wanted to hang out with these guys. I wanted to be their friends. And that song Unity is like one of the most incredible anthems. And I love that he just even says, ain't nothing wrong with another Unity song. And that rings in my head every time I go to make a record. I hear that in the back of my head. I mean, like, it's okay. You got to write another song about people coming together, because it needs to be said over and over again. But also there's a youthfulness to that. It's speaking directly to teenagers. It's speaking to people who are still in high school. It is the anthem. And I love seeing this, because I feel like every generation, once kids hit 14, 15 and they start to discover who they are, you'll always find an Operation Ivy t-shirt on somebody in some little clique somewhere. And it makes me smile, because that's who they were for me. They were one of the bands that made me realize I was part of a clique. It was a clique that wasn't popular, but man, we had a great soundtrack, and that was the punk rockers. I heard High Vis through my friend Tom B, who's a really close friend of the band Killswitch, and him and I always talk about punk and hardcore. We're very similar. Tom Begrowitz, I should say his name, Tom Begrowitz, really key figure in the metal scene. He worked for Century Media for many years, and now he's kind of our travel photographer. He travels with the band, so we have a lot of discussions about hardcore and punk. He turned me on to High Vis. The first thing I noticed about them was the guitaring. I'm a big Dag Nasty fan. I love melodic hardcore and punk. They've got that. They've got this, it's not just punk, it's sort of indie rock, it's sort of proto-emo. They sit on that really interesting style where, I think a lot of people, when you say the word punk, you think this one thing, but punk in essence is really diverse. It's more about an attitude and a culture than it is a sound. And these guys sort of straddle that indie rock, punk rock, hardcore. But what makes them great, two things. One, the vocalist you can hear the passion in his voice. You can hear the accent. Sometimes when bands from England sing, you can't really tell they're British. This band is very British. You can hear the sort of accent coming through, the way he says things. I love it. It's got an attitude to it, but there's passion there. There's this yearning. There's almost a melancholic sadness too through it. And then if you see them live, it's powerful. I got to see them in Australia. I'd just gotten off stage, opening for Iron Maiden, and I ran across town, me and Tom, we ran, well, took a cab rather across town, and walked in and watched this band side stage, and I was just chills. My arm, the chills just kept happening. I kept getting teary-eyed, and I thought to myself, this band's important. Whatever they're saying, and watching the crowd reaction too, because they're opening for a band called Speed, which are a pretty like straight up hardcore band, and seeing this band that was a little more melodic and punk leaning, and the entire audience is singing along at the top of their lungs, and you can see the emotion in people. They're just, I think, a band that you're just going to hear a lot more of. They're important. They're doing what I think punk rock needs right now, is injecting a lot of soul back into it, where it's not about image, it's not about trends, it's not about fashion, it's about having something important to say and putting it out there with just no filter, no barriers, just raw, unapologetic, melodic, beautiful punk rock.